On November 22, 1963, the world watched in disbelief as President John F. Kennedy was gunned down in Dallas, Texas. Within hours, Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested. Within days, he was dead too. Almost immediately, a far more enduring story began to take shape, one that has never quite faded from the American imagination. For decades, many people have believed that Kennedy's assassination was not the work of a lone gunman, but the result of a much larger and darker conspiracy. At the center of that belief sits one of the most notorious forces in modern history, the Mafia. The alliance that turned into a blood feud. Before John F. Kennedy became president, the relationship between his family and organized crime was far more complicated than most Americans realized. During the razor-thin 1960 election, rumors circulated that Mafia figures, particularly in Illinois and West Virginia, helped deliver crucial votes. At the time, these alliances were viewed less as scandals and more as unsavory but practical political arrangements. Power brokers existed in the shadows, and politicians sometimes benefited from them. That uneasy relationship collapsed almost immediately after JFK took office. Instead of shielding organized crime, the Kennedy administration declared war on it. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy dramatically expanded federal prosecutions against mob bosses, increasing the number of cases several-fold within a few years. Figures who once believed they were protected suddenly found themselves under relentless surveillance, subpoenaed before grand juries, and facing serious prison time. No one embodied the reversal more than Robert Kennedy. To mob leaders, he wasn't just an aggressive lawman, he was a traitor. They believed the Kennedys had accepted help, then turned around and tried to destroy the very people who had delivered it. The sense of betrayal is central to why Mafia involvement in JFK's assassination continues to feel plausible to so many observers. Motive, after all, is one of the clearest pieces of the puzzle. Quote, "The committee believes, on the basis of the evidence available to it, that President John F. Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy." That conclusion, issued years later by the House Select Committee on Assassinations, didn't name the Mafia outright, but reopened the door to theories involving organized crime. The mob bosses with the most to lose. When investigators and historians focus on possible Mafia involvement in the assassination, the attention almost always narrows to a small group of powerful crime bosses who stood directly in the Kennedy administration's crosshairs. These men were not low-level operatives or distant figures. They were heads of criminal empires whose power, wealth, and freedom were being systematically dismantled by federal prosecutors. If anyone in organized crime had both the motive and capacity to retaliate, it was them. Carlos Marcello, the boss of the New Orleans crime family, is often described as the most likely candidate. Robert Kennedy personally ordered Marcello's deportation in 1961, a move that humiliated him and disrupted his operations. Marcello later made statements suggesting that removing the president would be the most effective way to stop the Justice Department's crusade. To conspiracy researchers, this wasn't idle talk, it sounded like strategic thinking from a man used to solving problems permanently. Santo Trafficante Jr. of Tampa and Sam Giancana of Chicago also had reasons for deep resentment. Both had lost enormous profits when Fidel Castro seized control of Cuba and shut down Mafia-controlled casinos. In a bitter irony, the CIA later partnered with these same mobsters in plots to assassinate Castro, blurring the line between government operations and organized crime. That overlap made it easier to imagine how such figures might move within shadowy spaces without immediate detection. Quote, "Organized crime figures like Carlos Marcello, Santo Trafficante Jr., and Sam Giancana had the motive, means, and opportunity to assassinate President Kennedy." Silence, fear, and the long shadow of Omertà. One of the strongest reasons suspicion continues to fall on organized crime is the way the Mafia has historically insulated itself from accountability. Omertà, the Code of Silence, is not just cultural mythology, it's a rigorously enforced system that has protected mob operations for generations. People who violate it risk intimidation, disappearance, or death. Applied to the Kennedy assassination, this reality reframes the absence of clear confessions not as a weakness of the theory, but as one of its most consistent features. Investigators who later explored Mafia involvement repeatedly ran into the same wall. Potential witnesses stalled, contradicted themselves, or waited until the end of their lives to speak, often without documents or corroboration. Critics point to this as unreliable hearsay, but supporters argue that this is exactly how Mafia-related truths tend to surface, if they surface at all. The silence is also why circumstantial patterns carry so much weight. The Kennedy administration created powerful enemies. Those enemies had the ability to act covertly, and afterward, no one with direct knowledge ever provided a full public account. To believers, that combination feels less like coincidence and more like design. Quote, "The Mafia had the motive, the means, and the opportunity, and the discipline to keep it secret." The final element, discipline, is what gives the theory its durability. Organized crime does not rely on luck or improvisation when survival is at stake. If mob figures were involved, the expectation would not be loose ends or dramatic confessions, but silence enforced over generations. The Oswald problem and lingering doubts. Any discussion of Mafia involvement eventually runs headlong into Lee Harvey Oswald. Officially, Oswald acted alone. He owned the rifle, was present in the Texas schoolbook depository, and had a history of political instability. Yet, for many Americans, Oswald has never felt like a satisfying explanation, especially given how quickly his story ended. Oswald's murder by Jack Ruby, a nightclub owner with documented connections to organized crime figures, remains one of the most troubling moments in the entire case. Ruby's claim that he acted out of grief and patriotism has never convinced skeptics. The fact that Oswald was silenced before he could fully stand trial fed the perception that someone wanted him gone. For those already suspicious of the Mafia, Ruby looked less like an emotional citizen and more like a cleanup man. Even setting Ruby aside, Oswald's background raised questions. He had connections to pro-Castro and anti-Castro groups, moved through intelligence-adjacent circles, and left behind a trail that seemed strangely theatrical but thin on clear motive. Critics of the lone gunman theory argue that Oswald may have been used, either knowingly or unknowingly, as a fall guy. In that narrative, organized crime didn't need Oswald to be a master assassin, they just needed him to take the blame. Why the theory refuses to die. More than 60 years after the assassination, belief in Mafia involvement persists because it satisfies a need for meaning. The death of a young, charismatic president reshaped the nation. Accepting that such a seismic event could hinge on one man acting alone feels emotionally insufficient to many people. The Mafia theory also endures because it aligns with what we know organized crime is capable of: violence, patience, and long-term planning. It doesn't require science fiction or implausible technology, just revenge and opportunity. Combined with documented hostility between the Kennedys and mob leaders, the story feels disturbingly plausible. In the end, no theory, Mafia or otherwise, has been able to close the case in the public mind. The assassination remains unresolved, not just legally, but psychologically. As long as questions linger about motive, secrecy, and silenced voices, the belief that the Mafia killed JFK will continue to haunt the edges of American history, passed down less as a theory and more as an unanswered warning about power left unchecked. Now it's time to hear from you. Do you think the Mafia played a role in the assassination of President Kennedy? Let us know in the comments section below.